welcome to Man in America. I'm your host, Seth Holhouse. So I'm sure that you're seeing that there is an alarming rise in transgender children, children that are being really taught the idea that the struggles that they have in life are because they're in the wrong body. It's not puberty, it's not social pressure, it's not social media. It's because you're in the wrong body. And if you change your body, it's going to fix everything. And so these kids are following the advice of their counselors and their classmates and their teachers, and they're going through these changes that are catastrophic, oftentimes leaving them sterile, leaving them missing parts of their body, and oftentimes also ending up in heavy depression or suicide. And so joining us today to help make sense of this, help make sense of what's really going on and what's causing this to the children, what are the rates of increase that we're seeing, is a very courageous woman that you've probably seen before if you watch documentaries such as What is a Woman by Matt Walsh. And it's Dr. Miriam Grossman, who is a psychiatrist that has been speaking out against this for well over a decade. And she actually just recently testified in Congress about this exact issue. And so to help introduce her and introduce our discussion, I'm going to play this 5-minute clip of her recently speaking to Congress. So let's go ahead and jump right into that.
My name is Miriam Grossman. I am a board-certified child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist, author, and senior fellow at Do No Harm. I have been taking care of patients for 45 years. I'm going to use my time to respond to Dr. McNamara. First, I'm struck by her use of the phrase, sex assigned at birth. Sex is not assigned at birth. Sex is established at conception, and it's recognized at birth, if not earlier. Dr. McNamara claims that her views are science-based, but to claim that sex is assigned at birth is without any scientific basis whatsoever. Its language misleads people, especially children, into thinking that male and female are arbitrary designations and can change. That is simply not true. Dr. McNamara claims that social and medical interventions are the only evidence-based treatment and that scientific evidence shows it is life-saving. Without it, she's warning us, kids will commit suicide. Well, a growing number of countries have effectively banned the care to which she's referring. And thank God there's been no wave of suicides or other mental health catastrophes. 3 years ago, Finland placed strict limitations on medical interventions for minors. Sweden did the same thing after a 14-year-old girl was found to have osteoporosis and spinal fractures from puberty blockers. An investigation concluded, quote, the risks of anti-puberty and hormone treatment for those under 18 currently outweigh the possible benefits. The UK conducted a review and called the evidence very low. They've also placed severe restrictions on the care that Dr. McNamara calls life-saving. Norway also analyzed the data and has made similar changes in policy. The National Academy of Medicine in France warned, quote, great medical caution must be taken in children and adolescents given the vulnerability of this population and the many undesirable, even serious complications the therapies cause. Doctors in New Zealand and Australia have published similar statements. Is Dr. McNamara suggesting that all these countries are rejecting evidence-based treatment and placing their kids at risk of suicide? Regarding that point of view, Finland's gender expert, Dr. Rita Kaltiela, said, quote, it's purposeful disinformation, the spreading of which is irresponsible. All 7 countries, and Florida too, of course, concluded that kids don't need their development interrupted, the girls don't need their periods stopped and their voices lowered, and the boys don't need to grow breasts. What they need is psychotherapy. I have other objections to Dr. McNamara's testimony. She insists that her position, only hers, represents standard medical care. What she doesn't want you to know is that there is no standard. There's a debate. There's a fierce debate. And on the side opposite her stand such prominent figures as Stephen Levine, Kenneth Zucker, Paul McHugh, and James Cantor, among others. These doctors are giants in the field. They have been treating transgender patients and gathering data and publishing papers about them, and I mean no disrespect here, but since before Dr. McNamara was born. The point is that those veteran clinicians and others who have wisdom and experience are ignored because they disagree with the current narrative. They're against medical interventions for the same reason those 7 countries are. There is no evidence of long-term benefit, but there is evidence of harm. I'll end by quoting Jamie Reed, the courageous whistleblower from the Children's Gender Clinic in St. Louis. I believe that that hospital receives the medical education funding that we're discussing today. She said that doctors at that clinic said, "We are building the plane while we are flying it." We are building the plane while we are flying it. That's how they described the treatment at their gender clinic. Our precious tax dollars should not support such a perilous experiment. Thank you.
So that's who we're going to be speaking to today. She is a very important and powerful voice on this topic. And it's also a very, very serious topic. So we're going to be getting into what this looks like for future generations if this continues. So folks, enjoy this interview with Dr. Miriam Grossman. Dr. Grossman, I first saw you on, I think it was actually first an interview with Yanya Kellogg on American Thought Leaders, and then it was on What is a Woman, which if people haven't seen that, they really should see that, with Matt Walsh over at the Daily Wire. And I have to say, it's quite an honor to have you on the show because I've been following you for a while. So thanks for being here.
Oh, well, thank you, Seth. It's great to be with you.
Absolutely. So, obviously, as most of the people coming in this show will understand, especially from the introduction, we're going to be really diving into what's happening with this thing that 10 years ago I didn't see coming. You probably did, which is this massive push towards the transitioning of children, and just like the seriousness of that, what's behind it, what it looks like. The trends, are there more trans kids in there, today than there were 5 years ago or 10 years ago? And so I know this is your specialty, but how about you give us just a quick background of yourself, especially your work within this, because I think that you're one of the folks that really can speak this from an expert's perspective.
Yeah, well, I'm a child and adolescent and adult psychiatrist. So I'm an MD. I went to medical school, and I first became aware of the idea that of children being told that they might be born in the wrong body. I became aware of that quite a long time ago. It was actually maybe around 2007 or 2008. And the way that I became aware of it is that I was studying sex education. At the time, I was working at UCLA with UCLA students, and I was alarmed at the large numbers of kids that were coming in who had sexually transmitted infections, abortions, HIV concerns, and I decided to look into what kids are taught in their sex education, which had never really been an interest of mine. But because of all those kids with genital warts and genital herpes and, being upset about their abortions, I decided to take a look. And out of that, I discovered that sex education was not really about maintaining the health of young people. It was about promoting a certain ideology about sexuality, about being open to experimentation and so on. And part of my discovery at that time was the kids were being told about gender as opposed to sex. Okay, let's do some definitions here. Okay, we'll start with some definitions. These days, gender and sex are being used synonymously. And that is both incorrect and dangerous to do that, manipulative to do that. And I'll tell you why. So sex means male or female in terms of biology, in terms of physiology, and it boils down to whether an individual, whether the reproductive system is organized around producing eggs or sperm. And that's basically the definition, biological definition of male or female. And that is established at conception. Established at conception. At birth or before, it's made clear, or it's recognized, let's say. But it is established permanently at conception and cannot change. Now, gender is altogether different. Gender means how a person experiences themselves as being male, female, or something else. I mean, right now there's, every day there's another category of gender. So I've lost count to how many there are. But gender is basically a perception or an inner experience of oneself. And so you can see that they are vastly different, and that gender is something that is not based in hard science. It's not objective the way that sex is. It is a subjective experience, and it can change. And indeed, we're told by proponents of this ideology, let's call it, this belief system. In my book, I call it a belief system. We're told that gender is fluid and can change really, from day to day, if not more often. So there's a vast difference between sex and gender. Now, I discovered all those years ago that kids were being told that sex is assigned at birth, and that assignation is sometimes incorrect. And if it is incorrect, and if the child is one of those mistakes of incorrect assignment, well, they may feel that their inner identification is different than their biology, and in which case they need for their physical bodies to be aligned, so-called aligned with their feelings. Now, when I discovered this many years ago, that kids were being taught this by Planned Parenthood and sex education organizations such as SIECUS, which perhaps your audience has never heard of, Sexuality Information and Education Council of the U.S. They need to know about this organization. It is, along with Planned Parenthood, a flagship organization receiving a lot of tax dollars. And that these organizations were going out and providing curricula to schools, to school districts, and creating websites for young people to educate them on this topic. And they were telling kids that it's possible essentially to be born in the wrong body, and that it's not any kind of emotional or psychiatric issue. It's just a variant of the human experience. So it was being completely normalized. And I was alarmed as a child psychiatrist that this is a destabilizing and untrue information that's being presented to kids as fact. Now, and anyone that has had any education in terms of child development, but it's also common sense that it's healthy to have a strong identity. People want to know who they are. And that's true not only in terms of, you know, people want to have a strong sense of where they came from, who they are, who their family is, what their ethnicity is, what their beliefs are. And this is what adolescence is all about. It's about clarifying one's identity. And hopefully by young adulthood, there's a strong sense of identity. Now, the idea of teaching young children that they may not be what their body is. In other words, this disembodiment. This is a belief system that is based on the idea of disembodiment, that you are not necessarily what your body is, and that what you are thinking or feeling about who you are trumps what your body says you are. So it's a belief system, an irrational belief system, because it's an anti-reality belief system, not based on any medical evidence or scientific evidence that such a thing is possible. And it promotes the idea of, and it even celebrates, I would say, it celebrates the idea of disembodiment. So that immediately alarmed me. And obviously in 2008, 2009, this was not something that was widely known. But like I said, it was in our sex education. And so I included, when I wrote my book about sex education called You're Teaching My Child What?, I included a chapter on gender. And I warned parents, you better find out about this, and you better protect your kids, because this is dangerous. You do not want your kid to reject their body. You want your kid to love themselves just the way they are, and to know that they were born in a perfect body, whatever that body is. So that was my introduction to the belief system called gender ideology. And I've been trying to warn parents since that time. And my latest book, Lost in Transnation, a child psychiatrist guide out of the madness, is focused only on this issue and provides parents with the education and the tools that they need to protect their family from this onslaught. I have been seeing kids and families who are involved in this catastrophe, and I will tell you why I call it a catastrophe in a moment. I've been seeing them in my office. I have been talking to hundreds and hundreds of parents, and they uniformly tell me that they were not prepared for this. They were not prepared for the moment in which their child came to them or texted them or wrote them an email that said, Mom, Dad, you don't have a son, you have a daughter. Please call me Olivia. Don't call me Robert. Please use she and her pronouns. And please make an appointment for me at a gender clinic because I need puberty blockers. Parents all tell me that they were blindsided. They didn't understand it. They didn't know where it was coming from, and they didn't know how to respond. That is the purpose of my book. So that, before it happens, the book will help families that are already dealing with it, but primarily the purpose is to help families before they have to deal with it, to be prepared for this to happen in their family with their child, because no family is immune.
Folks, I've got a quick message for you. right now, the world is very, very actively going through a process that the experts are calling de-dollarization. And look, I've been talking about this for well over a year now, but maybe you're now starting to see it in the mainstream because they're now talking about it because it's really happening. Well, what does this mean? Well, there's a few factors, but there's two main factors. One is that the BRICS nations, okay, this is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and a whole coalition, they are actively getting rid of the US dollar. They're stopping their trade in the US dollar. And this is significant because the dollar's losing its status as the global reserve currency and as the petrodollar. This is what gives our dollar its value. But the other thing is that we have an enemy that's within our own government. Biden and his administration, they are actively working to destroy the dollar. And you can see it in their actions that they're not trying to save the dollar. They're actually trying to destroy it because they want to roll out their central bank digital currency. So you have these two forces coming in both at the same time, working to destroy the dollar, because what happens when that dollar gets destroyed? Well, literally your life savings, if they're sitting in the dollar, whether it's in a savings account or a bank account or the stock market or an IRA or a 401k, those savings, that money could literally be wiped out in a matter of days, weeks, even a couple of months. We're already seeing it with inflation, which is going to be much, much worse. If you're seeing the writing on the wall and you're thinking, what can I do to protect myself? Well, there's a few recommendations that I always have. One is just to make sure you've got your food. If you have land, ammunition, whatever it takes, real tangible assets. But fundamentally, the thing I recommend most is precious metals, gold and silver. Look, precious metals have survived the collapse of currencies, the rise and fall of civilization. And also a big factor in this is that the BRICS nations, their new currency they're introducing to replace the dollar, a lot of experts are saying it will be backed by commodities like precious metals. And so you can see there's going to be a stabilization and I believe a dramatic increase in the value of precious metals. Not to mention, look at the past 6 months, we're seeing 30% plus increase in the prices of silver and gold. So if you would go back and say you put 100 grand into silver 6 months ago, it could be worth well over $125,000, $130,000 because the dollar is losing its value. So folks, if you want someone that you can trust for buying your precious metals or gold and silver, I would highly recommend Dr. Kirk Elliott. So Dr. Kirk Elliott is a good friend of mine, but he's a strong Christian patriot. He understands what's happening in the world. He's got 2 PhDs, one in theology, one in economics. So it's the perfect blend of understanding, realistically, money in the end times. So if you want to set up a free consultation with Kirk's team, head on over to goldwithseth.com. So again, that's goldwithseth.com or call 720-605-3900. Again, it's goldwithseth.com. You go to the website, you scroll down. There's a simple form that you fill out right there. You put your email, name, contact information, and that sets you up for a free wealth consultation where you can talk to either Kirk or one of his experts to really understand what your options are. Or you can just call 720-605-3900 to take action today. And what's just kind of incredible to think about, if I go back to my high school years, I was a teenager. I probably went through bouts of depression, of feeling rejected by society, or any of the things I think a lot of kids go through. I also at some points wanted to get tattoos. When I was 16, I knew exactly what tattoo I wanted to get. I'm so glad I didn't do that. But
which one? Can you tell me?
It's funny because I was gonna get this, what's called the runic compass. It was this ancient kind of I think it was like a Viking compass that was supposed to be the compass of the soul. So it wasn't some silly, like I wanted to get a, Captain America tattoo or a Superman on my calf. It was something a little more interesting, but I'm so thankful because I had no idea who I was at that time. And that's part of the journey. And I can imagine that, especially now, if you look at the rates of depression amongst children and suicide amongst children and teens, and what social media does. And we didn't have social media at that time, when I was growing up. And so, or maybe it was at the very early stages. So I can imagine that in living in today's world where the kids are already really confused about so many things, that if someone comes in, your trusted guidance counselor, for instance, and they say, this might be the solution to all of your problems. They're not going to tell you that your problems are normal. You're a teenager. You're going through hormonal changes. It's okay if that girl broke up with you. You're going to survive. It's going to be okay. But if they instead are driving people towards that, I can imagine that it's easy to look at this and be like, I would never have done that. But, you know, as a confused kid in public school, you know, in as a teenager, you know, who knows what kind of stuff that they're telling these kids at these vulnerable places, especially if it's like, this is the solution. And if you do this, it's going to fix all these issues that you're having.
Well, Seth, you know, you said that very well. You hit on a lot of really important issues there. And I'll add a few things to that. Well, first of all, aside from kids being led to believe that living as the opposite sex will solve their mental health issues, I also want parents to know that when they do identify as something other than their biology, they get a lot of points for that in terms of, you know, their status, their social status.
Society praises it, right?
Well, their peers, amongst their peers and at school, they're going to get, you know, love bombed. They're going to get love bombed. And they're going to be, you know, held up as someone who's so brave and so unique. And, you know, we support you and we love you. And P.S., listen to this well, Seth. P.S., if your family doesn't support you in this, well, that means that they are not good people. And that means that your home may not be a safe place for you. And that is why, as I mentioned a moment ago, this sometimes leads to catastrophe. The catastrophe, well, there's different forms of the catastrophe, but one of them is estrangement and actually losing the child being so indoctrinated to believe that their parents are evil, transphobic people, and that their home is no longer a safe place. Now, mind you, they may have lived their entire lives in the most wonderful, loving, and I've seen this. I'm saying this because I know these families, loving, devoted parents who did everything that they could for their child. Were they perfect? None of us are perfect. Maybe they made some mistakes. We all make mistakes. But these kids, part of this belief system that the kids are indoctrinated with says that anyone who will not immediately accept your new identity, no questions asked, no one is permitted to say, let's think about this. This is a big decision. Maybe there's something else going on with you, let alone, I'm not going to use your new name because we put a lot of thought into your name. It's meaningful to us. We're not going to use opposite sex pronouns. So this can lead to the catastrophe of a broken family and an estranged child. Now, you also brought up that when you were a teenager, there were certain things you wanted, like a tattoo, and you're so pleased that you didn't do that. So, of course, that introduces the huge issue, which I also deal with in my book, of puberty. And what is puberty? And what does it mean to interrupt puberty and then to go through a simulated puberty of the opposite sex, which is what is being done now to thousands and thousands of kids in this country. In other words, they are being placed on blockers. Blockers are powerful medications that act on the brain to prevent the natural developmental process of puberty. Puberty is necessary. We need to go through puberty in order to become an adult. Puberty does not only mean the development of sex characteristics such as a lowered voice or facial hair or breasts. Puberty affects every system in the body, and certainly the brain. It's actually a reorganization of the brain. Puberty reorganizes the brain, and it takes until just about your mid-20s to have a fully mature brain. And the part of the brain that develops last, Seth, is called the prefrontal cortex. It's right behind the forehead here. And that part of the brain is the CEO. So that's the part of the brain that is rational and, thinking things out, thinking the weighing the pros and cons. Is this a good decision or not? What might be the consequences of getting that tattoo? Maybe I'll regret it. On the plus side, I really want it, but on the negative side, I don't know, it's permanent, I'll see. That is the part of the brain that develops last. Now, what we are doing, so-called affirming care, which is the narrative that the gender medical establishment in this country follows, it calls for allowing a child who is barely entering puberty, and that they could be 9 or 10 years old, because you see sometimes puberty starts pretty early. But let's say it's a normal puberty. Let's say the kid is 11, 12. Gender affirming care says that child should be placed in the driver's seat. And if that child says, Mom, Dad, I'm a girl. I don't want my voice to fall. I don't want to develop broad shoulders. I want to grow up to be a woman. I want to go on puberty blockers and estrogen. Those parents are told that the child knows best. Now, it is insane. We would not do that in any other field of medicine, obviously. But we are doing it in this field. Now, parents, I am telling parents in my book what they will not be told by their pediatrician, by their gender therapist, by their guidance counselor, on websites of, official websites of the American Academy of Pediatrics and so on. I am giving them the information that unfortunately they're not going to get. And that is that this is an experiment. We have never had, you mentioned earlier, the numbers of kids that are, presenting themselves as rejecting their bodies. They are presenting with complaints of disembodiment, as we would say in psychiatry, or body gender dysphoria, an intense rejection or discomfort of your body. What did I say a minute ago? I lost my train of thought.
Well, I actually did have a question for you amidst that is, what are the actual rates? Like, what kind of an increase are we seeing in kids that are transitioning, but also just kids that are identifying as being LGBTQ, whatever the acronyms are that keep being added on there? Like, what are things that now versus say 10 years ago or 5 years ago even?
Okay. So I'm just going to stick with the transgender part of it because that is the field that I'm focused on, and my book is about that. But within in terms of the T part of the LGBTQ plus, the best data that we have comes from Britain. You see, in this country, because our health system is not centralized, we don't have. It's impossible really to get good data because we just don't have a way of collecting that data. If you go to your private pediatrician and he, starts your child on puberty blockers, that's not going to be reported to any central database. So we can only estimate the numbers. But in places like like Britain, United Kingdom, they do have centralized healthcare, and in fact, they they're they have, well, it's about to close, but they have the largest gender clinic for children in the world in London. And that is called the Tavistock Clinic, the Gender Identity Disorder Service of the Tavistock. And they certainly did keep records. They were the only location in the UK for kids to get treatment for that condition. So their data showed that in the past 10 or 12 years, there was a 5,000% increase in the number of kids coming in. So in 2010, they may have had under 100 kids a year, well under 100. I think that it was more like 70 or 80 back then. And that even represents a significant increase from 10 years before that. Okay, so gender identity disorder, as it was once called, before psychiatry changed the name of it 10 years ago, but it was such a rare condition, Seth, that when I was in medical school and did my psychiatry training, my child psychiatry training in the 80s, I never expected, me and my colleagues, the other, child psychiatrists that I was training with, we never expected to see even one case in our lives. It was something we read about in textbooks. It was so extraordinarily rare. And even those kids, Seth, it has been found that even in those really, really rare kids who present from an early age, like before the age of 6 or 7, they present, and these are mostly boys, overwhelmingly young boys, and they present with a persistent wish or insistence that they are a girl. Even those kids, Seth, the vast majority of them, if they go through natural puberty, do reach a sense of comfort with their bodies and do no longer wish to live as the opposite sex. Now, something clearly happened in our culture and within medicine that created this epidemic of cases. Again, 5,000% increase. And not only, I also want to point out that it's not only that there's an increase, it's that it's a completely different demographic of kids. Because in the past, we saw, like I said, the young kids way before puberty, before, they were in preschool. I don't know if you're familiar with Jazz Jennings.
Yes. The Instagram kind of social media celebrity, right?
Yeah. Jazz really is the poster child for childhood transgenderism. But Jazz, from the age of 2 or 3, was insisting that he was a girl. So this is an altogether different thing than what we have now, which are kids who are either on the cusp of puberty. Oh, there we go. Yeah. The kids that we're seeing now, that 5,000% increase, are kids, mostly girls, a lot of boys as well, but mostly girls. They have either are about to enter puberty, or they are in puberty, or they are young adults, and they have significant mental health issues. Like you mentioned, Seth, they have anxiety, they have autism, they have depression, they are cutting themselves, they have a lot of family issues. So they present with a lot of complexities from a child psychiatry approach. They're very complex. In addition, we know that these are kids who have immersed themselves in social media and in YouTube videos, and they have been influenced heavily by the internet, by their friends, by their schools, and so on. So it's a completely different picture. And the affirming care proponents, and again, this represents the major medical and mental health organizations in this country, they refuse to differentiate. They refuse to acknowledge that this is a new demographic and we don't have data about them. How could we have long-term data when they just became, the whole thing just began 10 years ago? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, and I saw a recent kind of article talking about that within just one like school district. I think it was in New Jersey, where among the children that it was somewhere I think it was a 4,000% increase, and I think it was maybe 30% were elementary aged within this one school district. And so when I take a step back, I look at this. Okay, so I think that, yeah, as we talked about earlier, teenagers going through puberty have issues, whether it was the 1970s or the 2020s. It's part of growing up. There's confusion, all that. So it seems like that what's happened is that when you mention it, it's these kids that have these kind of stacked up other issues that are there, right? That then those children, when they're given that option of, okay, here, this is what's going to fix you. It's like, that's what I think it seems to me, that's what created this skyrocket, is that now the counselors start introducing this, right? When those kids are talking to their guidance counselor or, a therapist, that this gets introduced as a solution, and that's skyrocketing, right?
Well, that's true. But you know what? It's even more than that, because kids now have been introduced to this idea of being born in the wrong body since they were very, very little. It's not only happening when they are by the time they're teenagers, they've heard about this for a long time. Okay. I mean, kids who are now teenagers grew up, hearing about transgenderism, seeing that it was normalized and celebrated, hearing about famous individuals who are now living as the opposite sex. So it's nothing new to them. Okay, it's something that they grew up with, and it's something that they have. It's been presented to them as fact, as something that's just possible for different people, and they may be one of those people. So it's not something that they needed any introduction to. The problem is that they have not been told about there's so much that they haven't been told. They haven't been told that the transitioning and the medical interventions and surgical interventions do not necessarily help their mental health. And the studies that we have, and they're older studies, again, because this is a new cohort right now, we can't say that we have 30-year studies on this current group of kids because they haven't been around long enough. But the studies that we have from earlier times of individuals that were medicalized show that they continue to have mental health issues, and they are not necessarily doing better, and that they have regret, especially around reproduction. Because, Seth, and let's just take a moment and acknowledge this catastrophe part of it, when when kids are put on blockers and then cross-sex hormones, they can end up sterile. They can end up unable to have biological children. Now, when you're 12 or 15 or even 20, that may not matter to you. And you might just say, oh, I don't want that anyway, or I'll adopt, no problem. When you're 30, when you're 35, when you've met your lifelong partner, spouse, and you do start to think about that and realize that, it would be nice to have a biological child and pass on my genetics to a child, then it's too late. And we have to acknowledge another thing that parents are not going to hear about sufficiently if they take their child to a gender clinic is that there's a growing number of detransitioners. And these are people in their early or mid 20s who went through gender affirmation and now are just filled with regret and have to live with a disfigured body. They live as they go back to living as women or as men without breasts, possibly castrated, possibly without a penis. This is very catastrophic. We are in a dire situation, and that's why I testified in Congress recently against gender affirming care. And I don't know whether you wanted to show some part of that.
I'll play that in the intro, so because I want to give it some time as I set up the conversation. Yeah, and I'll put the link in the description so people can follow up on that. But there's one thing I wanted. Actually, I've got two questions which are much bigger, kind of deeper questions. So I'll start with the first because it kind of hinges on what you're just saying. When we're seeing a 5,000% increase in this among children over the last 10 to 12 years. The question I have is, what does our society look like in 20 years? What does our society look like in 50 years? And that's what really concerns me, I think, the most. So I've got a little girl who's turning 3 in a couple of months. And I'm thinking, what's the world going to look like when she wants to have her children? I mean, as a species, right? If you look at, say, yourself, say you're studying nature, or you're studying a particular species, and you see that this species starts doing X, and you can see how it changes the trajectory of the species. Like, this is a significant change to the foundation of what it means to be human and what it means to create to the next generation and to procreate. This is a huge shift. So, not to mention what it does to the family unit and what happens when a society has a family unit that gets broken apart. What happens after 3 generations of that, right? When children don't grow up with a male figure in their household they can look to and learn from. So, I know this is a little more of an extrapolation of information, but what do you see? How could this potentially change the trajectory of our human race? Because I agree with you that it's an epidemic. It's as almost as if there is polio going around, and you're thinking, okay, look, if this hits 10 or 15 or 20% of our world, the human race is in really dire situation. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm glad you're asking me that. In terms of the bigger picture, from 30,000 feet, what's it going to be like? Well, I would say that it's already here. In other words, I want you to know that my patients believe that whether someone is male or female is inconsequential, and that one shouldn't even be concerned with that issue. So, for example, if I'm talking to one of my young patients, 14 or 15 years old, and she might mention a friend of hers, and I would ask, oh, is so-and-so, it might be a neutral name, a gender neutral name. So I can't tell from the name. Yeah, so I might ask, oh, that's so nice that you made a new friend. Is Alex a girl or a boy? And so my patients might take offense at that. So they would say, you mean what they were assigned at birth? Why does that matter? Why are you asking me that? So it's as if maybe I would ask, oh, is Alex Black or Caucasian? It's offensive to my patients for me to ask that question. So when you ask, what is it going to be in the future would be one in which male and female has become inconsequential. Now, it's a vision for humanity. It's a vision to upgrade. At least the proponents would consider it an upgrade of humanity. It's humanity 2.0, in which male and female no longer exists, and reproduction has been separated from biology, so that you don't need an actual male or female to create a new life. You may need sperm and egg, or maybe not. The technology, the biotechnology is really racing ahead. And there have been efforts to create a life from the DNA in 2 eggs or 2 sperm. So there's a movement, it's called transhumanism, and it's a movement to go beyond humanity as we now know it. And it's a very, very dangerous movement. There's powerful, extremely wealthy people behind it. Some of them are transgender themselves. And millions and millions, if not billions, of dollars are being funneled into all these programs in hospitals and at schools and so on. Now, we have to protect our kids, because the biological truth of male and female that is established at conception and is permanent and is vitally important, nearly each of our cells, every cell that has a nucleus, is either male or female. Okay? And I explain this in the book as well, because I want parents to be educated and to be able to, like I said, inoculate their families against this destructive belief system, which is not based on biological truths. So I educate parents about the biology in my book so that they can teach their children from a young age about male and female, about it being permanent and unchangeable. So the future is, I do have concern, but I also have a lot of hope, because I know that in the end, nature wins. And I know that truth wins in the end. But people need to be informed and ready and prepared for this culture, this belief system of disembodiment, because they will try to recruit your child.
And I imagine even it doesn't matter how strong of a foundation that child has or what their values are once they get out into society, especially if they're at a public school or even a lot of private schools. It doesn't matter how well you taught them sometimes. They can fall victim to this. Now, something that you said, I mentioned I had 2 big questions, right? We kind of addressed the first one. And if you have time to kind of go over the next one for me, it was really the question of who and what is behind this. Because if this was just, say, there was a couple of, researchers, they came to this conclusion that, hey, this is the way that we're going to, treat this. And it was kind of passed through the medical system and down to the school counselors. That would be one thing. But what you're seeing is a massive orchestration of this. You're seeing it, Disney having non-binary characters. You're seeing Target having, trans, clothing. So to me, it has all the makings of some sort of very massive, centrally controlled global campaign, similar to how well COVID was orchestrated. So you had the same safe and effective language in every country of the world. You could see that it was centrally organized, right? And so with this push towards transhumanism, which I've covered a lot on the show, actually, I'm greatly concerned about transhumanism and people like Harari and Klaus Schwab talking about the need for transhumanism to evolve to the next level. But in terms of you mentioned some of these very wealthy people, some of themselves who are even trans, that are some of the people behind this. What do you think? Like, I guess the best to your understanding, who or what is behind this, and what is that? What is the end goal? Because I think any rational person would look at this and say, hey, this isn't healthy. This isn't good for kids. This is going to cause more suicides, more harm. But it seems like the people that are pushing for this are either ignoring that or they know it, and yet they're pushing. It's almost like there's some sort of evil entity behind this. It doesn't make sense to me.
Okay, so I'll say two things. One is we didn't yet talk about money. Okay, when one of these kids is captured by the belief system, put on blockers, and then cross-sex hormones, they are a patient for life. They are a medical patient for the rest of their lives. Because in order for a boy to appear more feminine and to live as a woman for his whole life, he needs medications. He needs estrogen. He needs testosterone medications, at the very least, not even mentioning the surgeries. So he becomes a patient for life. That's A. B, in terms of transhumanism and what's behind it, I don't know if you've heard of this woman, but I want you to have her on your show if you haven't already, Jennifer Bilek. Jennifer Bilek, Bilek.
Okay.
She is the person who has taken the deep dive into this question that you're asking. And she has amazing research and insights into this. I am focused as a child psychiatrist on the kids and their families and on the medical part of it. Jennifer Bilek looks at, the politics, the movement as a whole, what's behind it, where's the funding coming from, what is the motivation, what is the end goal? Jennifer Bilek.
Good. I haven't heard of her, but I will reach out to her as soon as I finish this, because these are the exact types of folks I really enjoy interviewing, because that's where my mind goes, and like, what's the bigger picture and all that. And so,
yeah.
Well, I really thank you for what you're doing. It is such an important thing. And I know that you've gotten a lot of flack, and it's much easier just to go along with the status quo of whatever the new thing is that the doctors are supposed to be pushing. And I think it's very important what you're doing. And I'll bring up your book one more time, because I really want to encourage people to get this. Even though my daughter is only 2.5 years old, I'm going to be getting this and even though I'm going to be sending her to a private school where I know the teachers and she won't have social media, I still want to make sure that I can protect her. Like, to me, this is the responsibility of a parent. When I was a kid growing up, what the big push was protecting us against drugs. We had DARE, drug against it, resisting drug addiction resistance education, I think it was. But it was educating kids on, you had like this is your brain on drugs with the egg frying, right? This is the thing. This is the new war on our children that we have to arm ourselves with. But we're not arming ourselves with guns and bullets. We arm ourselves with information and relationships and knowledge and confidence in what we're doing. So I'll put a link to your book in the description so people can pre-order it, because this is important. The reason why I asked about the future is because I think that this is something that parents need to understand, is that if we can't affect what's happening, if we can't take charge of what's happening to our children today, they're going to be the ones that are the policymakers, the CEOs. Like this can go from bad to worse really fast if we don't take control of it.
Well, thanks. I'll just say one last thing, and that is, in order to help parents who haven't faced this in their homes, I did a survey of parents who are going through this with their kids. And in my book, I provide responses from that survey of 500 parents, 500 parents from 17 different countries. The book is actually dedicated to those parents who have kids with rapid onset gender dysphoria, which is the type of gender dysphoria that we've been talking about. The book is dedicated to those parents and to the organizations that help them. But what I did is in the survey I asked those parents, if you could give advice to parents that have kids who are 5 or 10 years or 15 years younger than your kids, what would you tell them? And so I include that in the book, all that advice from other parents who don't want you to join that club of having a child who believes they are the opposite sex, and in many instances has gone on to medicalize and harm their bodies.
And I would also add that I think it's also important for grandparents. I think a lot of the folks that are watching and listening, they're no longer, raising 5-year-olds or 10-year-olds, but they might have grandchildren that are of that age. And sometimes, because I talk to a lot of these folks as I'm traveling, and their children might be much more part of this kind of system, but it's those couple of hours every week that they get with their grandchildren. They can still influence, and they can help educate their children on the real effects of this. So that way their child doesn't come to them and say, well, your grandson Billy is now, Belinda, right? They can help, guide that. So I think it's also in the hands of the generation of grandparents as well.
Yes, that is such a good point. As a grandparent myself, I will agree with you. Grandparents can have a huge, huge impact. The parents are so busy, they're working, they're running around, they're raising the kids. They don't have time to read books and listen to podcasts, right?
Exactly. Well, Dr. Grossman, thank you again for coming on the show, and just thank you so much for what you're doing. It's an honor to have you here.
Thank you, Seth, for this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. All right, folks, I hope you enjoyed that interview. We're now going to be jumping into an economic update with Dr. Kirk Elliott. Kirk, man, it's great to have you back on. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. How are you doing today?
Actually, good. Yeah, I'm actually doing really, really well. A lot of exciting things going on, and just a feeling of optimism, which is nice, because it hasn't always been the case these past couple of years.
No, it's, and as you look at what's going on, I mean, over the weekend, I was reading a bunch of and we're going to go over this stuff today on today's show, right? The interest rate stuff, what's being reported, what's not, things that are happening at the United Nations, things that are happening within the Fed that are going unreported. But yet it seems like something is just off, right? Because there's all these big, huge, dramatic things happening, and they're focused on a submarine, right? And it's like they're focused on something else. And it's like classic misdirection. It's like, oh, don't look this way, and then, even more stuff coming out about Biden's. And it's like, the corruption is just wild. And you look at the stuff that the Supreme Court's listening to and not listening to, and it's like, it's just a deflection of what's really important and what's not. But to all of us, what is important? Well, our money is, right. It's our way that we live. It's how we ultimately retire, by having enough money, right? And so if you can take your eyes off of everything that's causing people's wealth or their way of life to erode, well, then you're going to actually win the game a little bit, right? So this is what they're doing. They're taking our eyes off of the important. Well, I want to refocus them on what's actually happening behind the scenes. It's not really being reported because it's some big stuff, Seth. It's big.
Yeah, and that's what I want to get into, because we've been tracking, really the battle of inflation versus interest rates, and inflation and interest rates. And the talking heads are trying to make paint the picture that what, it's under control and it's down a little bit. And even with the recent Fed meeting, how they've paused raising the rates, but that, which I think for a lot of people would say, oh, whew, you know what I mean? It's like they found the submarine. You know what I mean? Even though we know they didn't, but it's this feeling of like, oh, there's some relief there. But is it real, or again, is it some sort of misdirection? Because you sent me a little kind of list, which I'll pull up for the folks that are watching, and we'll go over it for those who are listening, of the central banks this week across the world. And this is a very different story. So even though we're seeing the Fed pausing the rate hike, what's happening with central banks around the world?
Well, this is the story, right? So in the world of interest rates, especially when they're coming from sovereign nations and their sovereign debt, they tend to be kind of like at par with each other, because here's how the game works. Let's say we're the United States and we raise our interest rates 1/4 of a point. Well, what are we going to do? Everybody else who's basically other countries who are putting their assets into maybe the European Central Bank or Japan or the Bank of China or whatever, because all interest rates are kind of similar. It's like, ooh, the United States, they just raised their rates 1/4 of a point. We got to put our money in there because people are chasing yield, right? Or you could have the second kind of rationale is countries have to raise their rates because their currency stinks, right? It's just like anything else. Like a junk bond has a higher rate than a AAA rated government bond, right? So people are seeking reward for the risk that they take. Then it has to be commensurate with each other. So as you start to see in a world of competitive devaluations, is what we're seeing. It's like they're all kind of across the board. Then one country raises rates, all the other ones start to raise rates because it's a fight for the foreign capital going into that country, right? So then they're all at par again. Well, then you have another one that raised rates. Oop, now the rest of them have to raise rates as well. So this is the game that we're playing, and it's a dangerous one. But in America, they're playing a political game with this, right? Because they're just printing money like there's no tomorrow. In fact, it's like what you and I talked about. It was either last week or the week before, when they decided, right, not only are we going to raise the debt ceiling, we're taking the ceiling off of the debt ceiling, and we're just going to print money like there's no tomorrow without any kind of restraint, right? That's what causes inflation. That actually is the true definition of inflation. It's just an increasing money supply, because it takes more of that devalued junk currency to buy valuable goods and services. So when we see price increases, it's just a reflection of the increase in the money supply. That's all that it is. But in the prices that we see going up are a symptom of inflation. So if we start to remember that, all of this stuff starts to make more sense. So if they keep raising the money supply, if they keep printing like there's no tomorrow, but yet they're hiding the fact that they're actually raising the money supply like there's no tomorrow by reducing the M2 money supply, which is the amount of money that we have to spend in checking accounts or savings accounts or money markets, right? So they're saying, no, we're decreasing the money supply. No, they're printing money like there's no tomorrow to fund every stimulus under the sun. In fact, they just took the ceiling off debt ceiling. They're not reducing the money supply. They're increasing it by a lot. They're reducing the amount that we as people have to spend. And that's a devastating consequence, because they're printing money like there's no tomorrow that causes inflation, yet reducing the amount in the banks that we have access to, which is like the worst of all possible scenarios, making prices higher and giving us less to buy with, right? This is their cockamamie scheme. So when I see when I saw, and we talked about this briefly, but when I saw that the Bureau of Labor Statistics changed the CPI, the inflation rate, from 5 point something to 4 last week, it's like, what did that tell me? It's like, I knew what they were going to say it was going to tell you. They're going to say, we're winning the war on inflation. The Biden plan is doing great. Look, inflation went from 5 point something down to 4%, a 25% decrease in prices. It's like baloney. My wallet doesn't tell me that there was a 25% decrease in prices just because that's what your bogus made up numbers of CPI say. My wallet tells me when I go to the grocery store, prices didn't come down 25%. My wallet tells me when I go to the gas station, prices didn't come down 25%. My wallet tells me when I'm looking for a new car or used car, they're not 25% less, right? So that tells me that they're fudging the numbers. But they needed to have that happen so they could say, we're winning the battle, therefore, we don't have to raise interest rates this month. We can pause them, right? Because it's this catch-22 of you pause interest rates and what happens? What's the result? Inflation persists and goes through the roof. You keep raising rates to slow down inflation. What's the cause and effect of that? Well, people are living hand to mouth right now at the margin, and you keep raising rates and it's going to kill the economy overnight. Either one, because we are where we are in this cycle, either one is going to cause economic contraction. Number one, people aren't going to spend money with a rise in interest rates. Number two, people can't afford to spend money because inflation is going through the roof. It's seriously a lose-lose situation. So they paused because they didn't want to, well, A, they wanted to tell the world they're winning the war on inflation, but B, people can't afford the excess interest rates, right? So, but here's what happened in the rest of the world. And remember, competitive devaluations, banks tend to do the same thing outside of a weird radical event that might happen in a country like, credit, it's no longer AAA plus rated bond. The US dollar got downgraded to AA or single A or B or worse, junk status, right? So unless something like that happened, you're going to see all the rates kind of move together. But nothing like that happened yet. But all the rates moved together except for America, right? Because look what happened in the United Kingdom. They raised rates by 0.5%. 50 basis points is 0.5%. Well, that's more than expected for the 13th rate hike that they've had there. Switzerland raised rates by 0.25%. Norway raised rates by 0.5%, which was more than expected. These aren't new expectations. UK, 13 rate hikes over the last in a row. Norway, 11 rate hikes in a row. The United States, well, they paused. All right, we paused because we're winning the war on inflation. No, we're not. They're just pretending like we are. But look at Turkey. Turkey is terrible, right? Turkey, 6.5%, 650 basis points, a 6.5% interest rate hike. So now their interest rates are up to 15%. And people have called me this week and say, Kirk, this is really bad. What's going to happen to the price of oil? What's going to happen there? This is terrible. It's like, okay, this is not an uncommon thing. In fact, it happened in America. In 1983, our interest rates were 18%. So seeing Turkey at 15% doesn't bother me, but it does tell me we're going to much higher interest rates around the world, because this is why they have to raise rates that high, is to slow down inflation. Inflation is still a problem globally. The reason we had 18% interest rates in the early 80s was because inflation was at 14.3%. They needed to slow that down. Why are interest rates going to keep going up? And why was the fact that we called a pause on ours so stupid? It's because everybody knows inflation didn't come down. Inflation's not 4%. In fact, unofficially, if you were to compare apples to apples, how inflation was measured in 1983, it's at 20 to 25% today. That's the reality. So interest rates have to keep going up. Now, this led to something else, right? This led to the 14th month in a row that leading economic indicators have been in decline. So there's an index called the Leading Economic Indicators Index. It's not a fancy name, right? But what does it measure? It measures all of the economic indicators, the leading ones that we have: CPI, gross domestic product, number of new home applications, amount of consumer debt. Let's see, like CEO, basically, what would you even call it? It's like the CEO confidence level, the manufacturer's confidence level, right? It has all of these things added all into one. Well, what did it do? It's down for the 14th month in a row, with the expectation this isn't going to stop. Now, nothing makes sense unless it's held into perspective, and compared against other times. So when was the last time that we had 14 rate, these leading economic indicators indexed down in a row? The answer is never. Not even during the Great Depression. Every once in a while, you'll have a month where something pops up, right? And it's like, ooh, tricks everybody. And then it comes down the next month. We haven't even seen that. We've seen 14 months in a row of leading economic indicators in decline. This economy that we have under the Biden administration is a sick one. It's very sick. It's not healthy. It has no stamina. It has no oxygen, right? It's run out because people aren't spending money. This is the economic reality of America that we're living in today, Seth.
So there's two questions that come to mind. One about Turkey, which I'll ask that one first, and then the other one about kind of what we're talking about, here. So as it relates to Turkey, though, because I know that Turkey is one of the biggest gold buying nations. Right. They're, in that BRICS circle, they're, whenever you see the charts about, nations that are buying gold, they're oftentimes, the ones that are high on the list. Now, my question is, because you mentioned how the currencies in a lot of ways are very tied together, right? So, if the U.S. currency, if the rates are going up, then, you're going to see it trickle into especially a lot of the European, currencies, et cetera. So, do you think that when you look at Turkey and the fact that, they raised 6.5 points, right? Like that's huge. Like that's a massive, 1 point is huge, right? So do you think obviously we know that they're not backing their currency with gold, right? Like as far as I know, their currency is another fiat currency. It's not a gold backed currency, right? So do you think that part of it is because they see the writing on the wall, they know that the currencies will be collapsing, and so they're just kind of shifting away, and as a nation, their central bank is putting more money into gold? Like how do you make sense of that?
Yeah, so Turkey is making basically a plea to enter the BRICS nations. Right. It's not part of, BRICS is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Right. So they want in. So does Mexico. So does Saudi Arabia. So do all these other countries. Right. So as you look into that, what are they trying to do? They're trying to make a play that they have a strong currency. They should be part of the BRICS nations. And overall, the BRICS nations are saying, we're ushering in a central bank digital currency, but it's going to be better than other countries because it's going to be backed by gold, right? So when you look at that, what they're doing, the largest purchaser of gold since the year 2010 has been Russia, 1,600 tons. The second one has been China, almost 1,000 tons. The third one is Turkey at over 400 tons. Then you've got Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, all at 200 plus tons, right? India at 200 plus tons. This is a lot. We're not talking about ounces or pounds of silver. We're talking about thousands of tons, right? So to me, when I look at that, we don't know the exact answer, but in time we will. So it's one of two reasons. Number one, they're using that purchasing of gold as like this dangling carrot, laying it out there for all the world to see. It's like, hey, look, world, we know there's options with central bank digital currency. We want yours and ours. Ours is going to be backed by gold. This is going to be amazing, right? Or they might know that, nobody wants a central bank digital currency that's got complete command and control attributes to its existence. They know what you buy, they know what you sell, they know what your ideology is, they know what religion you are, they know what politics are. How do they know that? Based on what you buy and sell, right? So there's already states and countries that are in opposition to a central bank digital currency, like Texas, like Arkansas, like Oklahoma, like Wyoming, like Utah, like Alaska just this week. And this is big, right? So these are states where they're saying, we're going to have a gold-backed currency in our state. We'll use gold as legal tender, or we're going to have a sovereign bank, a state sovereign chartered bank, not a federal charter bank like FDIC, a state one that gets out of the Federal Reserve system. And boy, when you have that and they want to back it by gold, you've got a lot of like states' rights issues starting to play out here where they're kicking the Fed to the sidewalk. And this is exactly what we need for competition to say, look, we don't want CBDCs. Nobody does. It's complete intrusion on our bank account. It is a massive problem, right? So you've got these alternative currencies that are now coming into the limelight. And this is what we get to participate in, which is why you and I have been shouting this from the rooftops for a long time. If you want to protect and preserve yourself from a bank that's run out of control, that wants to grab everything, it's a power grab of everything, it's a money grab of everything, well, then you have to do the right thing at the right time, right? And this is where we start to follow those central banks that are gobbling up gold by the thousands or hundreds of tons that I believe we don't know what the exact reason is. All I know is that they're doing it. Number one, they think their system is going to fail and they still want to be the reserve currency. So they're kind of de facto backing it up. Or B, they're using it as the carrot to entice people in.
That makes sense. So the other question I had was about, so you mentioned there's these 14 areas where we're seeing a decline and we've never seen that before. And so, but if you look at, okay, well, I guess I'll take a step back. One thing I've learned to kind of one worldview I have now in framing things is that a lot of times what we see happening is false. And the true situation is hidden somewhere within the agenda, within whatever they're pushing. And so you can't necessarily see the truth by just looking. You have to dig and uncover things, okay? So when we see, this is what's kind of confusing for me is that, okay, you're saying these 14 indicators are showing that there's the opposite of growth, right? There's decline in these 14 areas, never happened before. Yet you look at the stock market, which is, it's at almost an all-time high for the year. And so if you look at those and kind of compare, it's almost like there's so many indicators that like right now that the stock market should be struggling, right? To, if that's a kind word, that you'd see precious metal prices going even higher, that you would see the de-dollarization really kicking into effect. There's so many things like that it's kind of like even a year ago, you could already see them happening. Yet it just, to me, it's like there's some part of it that feels like maybe because we're entering into an election year, that they're pulling some sort of Babylonian money magic trickery to try to preserve this system as long as possible. And that's why it's like against all odds. It's almost like someone has cancer, right? And it's like it's terminal, and it's like they should have actually passed on, a long time ago, years ago. But they're like all this money is being pumped in to like prop them up and prop them up and prop them up. And it's like it doesn't make sense that they're still here. And like that's how it feels like with the system, especially with the economic system we're seeing. I mean, is that something you're seeing as well? And what do you think about that?
It doesn't make sense. And when something doesn't make sense, it's not real. If it's just thriving. When you look, what causes the stock market to grow, right? To answer that, your question is, it's revenues, right? It's always has been, always will be. When people spend money, it causes earnings to go up. When earnings go up, profits go up. When profits go up, now you have a larger a price to earnings ratio, right? And it's like the stock prices go through the roof. So when we've got declining wages, rising prices, increasing taxes, and a higher cost of borrowing, all of that's a recipe for disaster, not a recipe for growth, recipe for disaster. Couple that with banks that have run out of money, and you have to have like the most amazing credit score on the planet to even get a personal loan, right? I mean, it's just like, it's hard. So there's no reason, there's no solid rationale why the stock market should be doing well right now. There's none, which means it's probably stimulus money being injected into the system with money that they're printing out of thin air, to actually keep it propped up and have the illusion that it's doing well. But it's truly not. Are the numbers propped up there? Yep. So that it impacts people positively, but it's not real. So if it's not real, it's not going to last. And that's why people are playing with fire by keeping money allocated in the stock market for too long, because what it is it's not people spending. It's not solid growth. We don't have any money to spend. It's stimulus money being injected into the system, to keep it propped up, to have the illusion that the economy is doing well.
I see. It's almost like Weekend at Bernie's, right? Like that's what,
Pretty much.
like that's what we're living in right now. And until it's not,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? And that's the thing, is that I suspect that it's like, it's good. It's good. It's like, it happens really slow and then it's all at once. Right.
All at once. Yeah.
So Kirk, we've only got about 10 more minutes for the show today. And I know there's another topic we're going to be touching on, but I also just wanted to follow up with you, and because this has been something that a lot of folks are talking about, which is what we've been talking about with regards to these other gold companies. And I just wanted to hear from you, because I know a lot of folks have been reaching out. They've been like, I'm seeing people in the comments talking about this, and it's really unfortunate. And what's funny is I even see people trying to defend this stuff. Like I saw someone commenting on YouTube, I think, that was saying, hey, look, like, what's this guy talking about? It's normal to pay 60, 70 bucks an ounce for silver right now. And I'm thinking, like, is that really the case? That hasn't been my experience, but I just wanted to see, because you're in the middle of this storm. And I know that we, even gave out your CEO's email and said, hey, reach out to them. So what's your update on what you're seeing happening?
Well, so that comment that it's normal to pay $60 or $70, sadly, that's true. And I say sadly that's become the normal because companies are ripping people off so bad. Literally today, as we record this, like 1,000 ounce bar silver with silver at $23 and something an ounce, $25.70 an ounce. Even a 1 ounce round, you compare apples to apples, right? So it's a 1 ounce piece to another 1 ounce piece, less than $29 an ounce, right? So don't tell me that it's actually the norm. Sadly, it is the norm because people are ripping people off. But my strategy for wealth creation and wealth preservation is to minimize your cost, maximize your return. If you paid more than 30 bucks an ounce for silver, you've overpaid. Right. And the fact that people think that this is a normal thing is sad to me, because it's really, it should be less than $30. You're paying over 60. It's like, that's double. It's literally, you have to have silver move so much more for you to break even. Because I was talking to the president of a depository, the Texas Precious Metals Depository that we use. How much do they pay for stuff like that? If we were to liquidate it to them, how much do they pay? Spot plus $4, and they're no different than any other depository. They all pay the same. Some pay even less. Some will pay melt, which is less than spot. It's about 5% less than spot price because nobody wants it. So to liquidate those things, you have to go back to the firm you bought it from and say, hey, will you buy it? Because they make a market for it. Anything that's not a globally traded thing, you have to make a market for it. And we've all seen movies on it, Smiling and Dialing. It's like, hey, or we might have talked to people like that on the phone. Do I have a deal for you today? Right? It's like, we got this excess inventory in, and if you act on it now, because it's probably going to be gone in 3 days, I'll give you a 5% discount, but you have to do it today. that kind of garbage, right? It's like, no, if you have a globally traded commodity like silver bullion or gold bullion, it's simply a 45-second phone call, boom, lock it in, wire you the funds, done. It's not something you have to make a market for because the market's already there. So I have seen statement after statement after statement, and the average that I'm seeing is silver in the $67 to $73 range that people are paying. Gold's average is about $34 to $3,700 an ounce range. And this isn't even for rare stuff. This isn't for something that's old and rare. And those are even worse, ranging from all the way up to, 300% over spot to so much over that you can't even count it. Because I've seen people pay $28,000 to $77,000 an ounce for gold. It's like, this is insane. This is absolutely insane. That is not an investment. That's a collectible, and they don't act the same. If you want to protect and preserve your portfolio, you should never go into a collectible because you have to make a market for it, right? So we're seeing hundreds of these reviews coming in, these portfolio reviews that we've asked for, and we asked for them on your show. If you think that's you think you got overpaid, then send an email to Ashley at KirkElliottPhD.com. That's ASHLEY at KirkElliottPhD.com. Now, I've seen maybe a couple percent, like maybe 5 or 10 out of the hundreds of portfolio reviews that people have sent me where they actually didn't get overcharged and it was okay. I call them back and say, you shouldn't do anything, right? It's actually a fair price what you paid for it. I wouldn't do anything. Now, you're still going to have to pay a commission, I'm sure, with those people when you liquidate, which is it's not really apples to apples because you charge nothing with us. But at least they didn't overpay up front, right? So there's very, very few of those. I mean, it's sick. There's maybe like 5. There's not many. But the ones that got abused really on their prices, they're plentiful. And that breaks my heart. It truly breaks my heart because people thought they were doing the right thing, Seth. They thought when they hear us talking on the show, when they hear other podcasters talking, people that they trust in the movement, and they're just getting so ripped off, it really hurts my heart for them because it's going to be hard to recover, but you can recover, right? This is why we're saying, send us your portfolio. We can sell it probably at a loss. I'm sure at a loss, put you into something that's going to move dollar for dollar with the silver market, just going to cheap bullion, 1,000-ounce bars, 100-ounce bars, ride it up. And if silver triples the rate of growth of gold, which is what the president of HSBC, one of the largest banks in the world, thinks, and so what if you had to pay 30 to 40% a loss to get out of it? Silver triples, that's still like a 260% gain. But the only way that you can recover that is to get into bullion that will move dollar for dollar with the markets.
Which makes sense. And it's, we're not going to name names in the show because, well, the thing is, it's not necessary because you can do your own research. But I've talked to you about this, offline, and I was surprised. I mean, these are, were companies that were being promoted by like shows that were way, way bigger than me. I'm a small potato, right? These are some very, very big names. So, so people can email Ashley, right? And just do like a portfolio review, or how does that work?
Yeah, I will actually do the analysis on it myself. And then one of my advisors will call you to go over the results, right? But the interesting story, I was going over this with a lady who invested $500,000, and she's like, "Wow, you overpaid by a ton," right? So she called the firm back, and they said, "Well, if we go into 1,000-ounce bars of silver, we can get you 17,177 ounces, and we'll only charge you 3%. So other guy you're talking to is going to charge you 8%, right?" So she said, "What should I do? I've got a dilemma here." It's like, well, they ripped you off once. What's to think that they're not going to do it again? You always have to go with who you trust, right? Whether it's me or somebody else, you go with who you trust. But then I said, here, I'll just tell you how many ounces you could get with me charging 8%. 18,877 ounces. They said, wait, that math doesn't add up because they're only giving me 17,000 and they're charging me 3%. You're charging 8%. I said, yep, they lied again. They lied again. Right. So here's where I just like to be completely transparent, honest, because it's not my money. I don't even think it's the client's money. It's God's money. And if we would look at everything in the light of eternity, it would be a completely different world. I guarantee it. Right. But it's like, yeah, got fooled once and decided to almost get fooled twice. It's like, man, it breaks my heart. It truly does, because I don't know how some people can sleep at night, but this is the world that we're living in. Bottom line, deal with somebody that you trust. Deal with somebody who you trust your hard-earned retirement with, and don't overpay for it, whether it's with our firm or not. Could care less. I just want to make sure that we're sounding these warning signs and letting you know about them to say, look, you gotta fix this. Don't go into something where you're not getting even close, where you're tripling, quadrupling the spot price of the metal and thinking that that's a good deal. It is not. At today's silver price of $23-something an ounce, you should not in any stretch or any circumstance pay more than $30 an ounce for silver.
Well, I mean, you said it flat out that, someone can buy 1,000-ounce bar from you for, 25 and some change. So like there's the benchmark.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the thing, is silver. And it's almost like you're buying gasoline, right? As a commodity. And say, right now you go to the gas station, it's $5 a gallon. And it's like, okay, well, maybe gas will be up at $7 a gallon by the end of the year. So if you come in at, say you can buy it at, $5.05, it's like, okay, that's safe. Let's go and buy some gas. But it's almost like that gas is gas. If there's somebody that's selling you gas for $30 a gallon and they're like, no, this is really special gasoline, it's like, it's a complete scam. It's like gas is gas. Now, look, maybe if someone's saying, look, this is vintage gasoline that was out of the first Model T Ford, and there's a huge collector market. And here's here's a certificate to say that it's authentic. And it's like, okay, maybe in that case, it's like, but you have to understand you're buying a collectible now. You're not buying a commodity, right? And you better understand the collectible gasoline market if you're going to be paying collectible prices and not just trusting the salesperson, right? So that's just kind of how I look at it when I've explained it to people too. It's like, take a simple commodity that's gas, it's wheat, it's milk, and it's the same thing. So, well, Kirk, if folks want to get a hold of you, either for a portfolio review or they want to move some of their assets into silver or gold, they can go to goldwithseth.com. This is goldwithseth.com, or call 720-605-3900. I'll put those in the description, as well as Ashley, your CEO's email address. Sorry, Ashley, but Kirk told me I could do it. People can reach out to her as well. And let's just hope that hopefully, and I feel like this is what's happening. I feel like that the conversations that you and I are having about these gold companies, for whatever reason, they're going really far. And it's not about you or your company or anything. It's really just saying, look, people that are watching a lot of these shows, they're talking about what's really happening in the world. There is this doom and gloom element to it. There are some scary things out there that you're becoming aware of that you're not going to see on MSNBC or even on Fox News. But it's just important to understand that there are companies that are trying to take advantage. And there's companies that are making a lot of money off of that, right? There's a lot of opportunity when people are freaking out. And so that's what's really key, is that, look, whether it's Kirk, or say you have your local person that you've always been going to that is fair, great. Just learn how to be discerning with this, because a lot of people are just trusting too easily. And look, don't trust me. Don't trust me. Don't trust Kirk. Don't trust anybody with this, because it's your money, and just do your research. So anyway, now, Kirk, what if someone hypothetically right now is working with another company and say they're getting ready to make a big purchase? They've got their invoice, they're mulling it over, they're talking about it with their wife. Can they send that to you as well? And you can say, hey, check this out. What do you think?
Yeah. I would love to, because again, we're people over profit. That's the philosophy of our firm. I need to go to bed at night sleeping well, right? That we've taken care of God's money. So send it to me. I'll tell you if you're overpaying or not, right? And But here's where your gut will start to scream, your intuition, that wisdom that God puts in us will start to scream. It's like, I'm overpaying. I don't trust their advice. Boy, I don't know what to do. Or maybe say, yep, that's absolutely fantastic. I'm glad Kurt confirmed it. I'm going to go with them, right? That's perfect. That's perfect. But let us know. Let us look at it so we can help guide you in the right direction, no matter who you use. I don't want you to overpay, because you know why? We're all called to be wise stewards with what we've been given, and we will help you navigate through that together. It's not going to take very long. It's just a quick little phone call, but it might take a while to review it depending on how robust your portfolio is. But then we'll give you the advice. Keep it, yay or nay, in part or in full. And that's it.
Great. Well, Kirk, thanks again. It's always fun having you on. Take care. Have a great rest of your week.